Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Question I get a lot, as I'm sure you do, Amy, is who is like your favorite person or most high-profile person that you ever interviewed?
I know. People ask that all the time, and it changes.
What's your answer?
Probably Barack Obama.
I've heard of him.
I'll never forget. He's like, Amy, I know I'm not going to win when he's running against Bobby Rush. And I said, you're not going to win. He goes, I know. I'm just trying to get my name out there. Oh, he got his name out there.
So you only interviewed him when he was running for Congress, when he was a state senator.
Yeah, and then I did some events with him when he was a U.S. senator.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, that's a real brush with greatness.
Well,
oh boy.
Well, then there was Mariah Carey. Martha Stewart was awesome. I got to tell you, that chick she was good. I loved her.
Right. And I mean, it's not a big deal because you've dated stars, Edward James Olmos, Mario Lopez. So
yeah, I went on a date with him and he called his mom every half hour.
Well, he's
a mama's boy. It's okay.
Yeah, he's a nice young man.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, for me, people expect you to say, oh, like Dick Cheney, George W. or something like that. But for me, it was Elie Wiesel. And this was when I was at WLS. So it was Bruce Wolf and I. And for those of you who don't know, Elie Wiesel was the Nobel Prize winner who wrote the book Night. He was a Holocaust survivor as a child. And I remember reading the book in high school. And then to get to interview, and then he went on to an academic career and very productive life. And he just passed away. He moved to Florida smartly. And he just passed away a few years ago. But that was like it was chilling. It was an honor. It was really chilling after reading his story in Night and thinking about the history of Western civilization and his contributions to it. That was my favorite, I think, most important interview I've ever been a party to. Which brings us to Maine West High School.
The Warriors.
Come out to play, yay. A controversial assignment, and the reporting on this is pretty sketchy, so you sort of have to read between the lines. There is a English department chair. Since when do high schools have chairmen of departments? When I was in high school, it was just like, that's my English teacher.
Oh, we had department chairs at Hersey, always.
Figures. The government schools, they love their bureaus. Elie Wiesel's, the chairman of the Maine West English Department is named Sausan Jabber. The assignment that she gave her class, her English class, was to read portions of Elie Wiesel's memoir, Night, and then juxtapose it to the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict and make TikTok videos about it. Why portions? It's not that long a read, and it's not that difficult. It's difficult sort of
personally, processing.
Emotionally, but it's not difficult in terms of understanding. The Chicago Jewish Alliance has publicly expressed concern about it. We had concerned teachers, past teachers, students who feel uncomfortable in the classroom. We don't want to silence anybody. That's not what our goal is. But I have a fiduciary duty to the Jewish students, teachers, and community, said Chicago Jewish Alliance co-founder Daniel Schwartz. But others have rallied to the defense of this teacher and the assignment, including a former student who praised the teacher, Jabber, how she changed the English curriculum, focusing on lessons that promote global citizenship and social justice. Also giving students whose ethnic struggles are not represented a space to be. The Council on American Islamic Relations has weighed in, Joseph Myburn from that organization. If we're going to take the lessons of the Holocaust, it deserves to be more. We need to understand that never again means we have to speak out against all genocides that are happening. other genocides have happened since the Holocaust and before the Holocaust. What she, the teacher, did is simply allow the Holocaust to be discussed among other genocides. So I think if you're listening attentively, you probably are picking up what they're doing, which is they're comparing the Israeli response to the October 7th terrorist attack in Gaza to the Holocaust. And she is encouraging her students to make those comparisons and to take passages from Knight, Elie Wiesel's magnum opus, to further that erroneous comparison. Now, you can take whatever position you want, but this is, when you want to talk about indoctrination and sort of directing students to think a certain way rather than exposing them to ideas and then having discussions about said ideas, periods of history, current events. This is not that. So I hope more students in District 207 and parents will weigh in on this, perhaps provide more detail than the local newspaper was able to as they tried to sort of paper over what's really happening here. But it's pretty clear to me. Oh, and by the way, speaking of current genocides, the Wall Street Journal reminded us of one that we mentioned before, but it's been a minute. In April of 2023, Secretary of State animatronic Anthony Blinken said the Sudanese Rapid Support Forces have systemically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis, while they targeted women and girls on an ethnic basis for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. That's the Biden administration Secretary of State describing a genocide that is occurring in Sudan right now. Where's the flags being raised about that? I mean, it's a description that's been offered by Blinken. What is the Biden administration doing about that? Where's the discussion of it? You want to talk about genocides? Where are the college protests? Where is the chair of the English department at Maine West offering this comparison as for consideration? Interesting how those who come from what they would call an anti-Zionist perspective, what I feel is more like a general anti-Semitic perspective, like to cherry pick, isn't it? And this is what you saw in 60 Minutes, the exit interviews for Biden administration officials, many of whom, and this tells you a lot about the State Department too, including under Trump, because we had some holdovers there, people who embedded themselves, were difficult to extract, like ticks. 60 Minutes this weekend platforming two Biden administration State Department officials who resigned over the Biden administration's policy on the Middle East because it wasn't pro-Palestinian enough. And we understand the Biden administration policy on the terrorist attack and the Israeli response is just what you saw from Kamala during the campaign, which is to try to middle the issue, to try to have it both ways rather than speak with moral clarity on the matter the way that, say, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been able to. So let's hear from them. Hala Raharit, who resigned over the administration's policies.
The level of anger throughout the Arab world, and I'll say beyond the Arab world, is palpable. Protests began erupting in the Arab world, which I was also documenting, with people burning American flags. This is very significant because we worked so hard after the war on terror to strengthen ties with the Arab world.
You believe that this has put a target on America's back, you've said.
100%.
Those are strong words.
Yes. I don't say them lightly. And I say it as someone that myself has survived 2 terrorist attacks. My first assignment was in the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. I survived a mortar attack. I say it as someone who has worked intensely on these issues and has intensely monitored the region for 2 decades.
Multiple diplomats we spoke with say the U.S. policy on Gaza has led to widespread dissent at the State Department. A rarely used method of sending cables to the Secretary of State, created during the Vietnam War so employees could voice objection, has received a record number of submissions over Gaza. 13 officials, including from the State Department, White House, and Army, have publicly resigned in protest.
Well, sure. Where do you think those State Department officials come from? The college campuses that have been roiled by these outrageous anti-Semitic protests. So where's the surprise? Josh Paul is another one. This is an amazing statement that he makes. Another State Department official in the Biden administration who resigned in protest.
There are people who might argue that this isn't a time for debate, particularly in those immediate days in the aftermath of October 7th.
I would argue exactly the opposite. I think the moment of October 7th was a moment of incredible worldwide solidarity with Israel. And had Israel leveraged that moment to press for a real, just, and lasting peace, I think we would be in a very different place now, in which Israel would not be facing this increasing isolation around the world, and in which its hostages would be free.
Nothing like a terrorist attack to jumpstart the peace process, says Josh Paul. These are the deep thinkers in the State Department, at least a couple of them. The woman is from spent her time at Georgetown. Real impressive credentials. The thinking, not so impressive. For more on this, please be joined by Rich Goldberg, former National Security Council official and U.S. Senate aide, currently senior advisor at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Rich, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet. Good morning.
The two Biden administration officials that you just heard from, that I'm sure you had saw on 60 Minutes, and what they represent in terms of the administration's posture towards Israel and the prospect of a hostage deal.
Well, these are known quantities. I mean, they have been doing this trotting out hysteria, since they resigned very publicly. They got ink spilled on them, giving interviews, hating on the administration, hating on Israel. I mean, they're true ideological warriors against Israel, against the West. That Josh Paul has been picked up by a foreign-funded, I think Qatari-funded operation called Dawn. All they do is they're just a conveyor belt of anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic information into the State Department, where a lot of the sanctions threats against Israel have come from. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm shocked that they continue to be platformed on the way out, but that's their game. As far as the ceasefire on the table here, listen, I'll be honest, I have a lot of concerns about this deal. If I had my druthers, this would be all hell to pay unless you surrender immediately and release all the hostages. Otherwise, we clear Israel to do whatever it takes to destroy Hamas in Gaza once and for all, and go after all the state sponsors like the Qataris and the Turks and the Egyptians and the Lebanese and others who have been enabling all of this, not to mention Iran, the parent company. But we are here, and it does seem that there is at least a posture on the other side because of President Trump's threats to bring holy hell down if there's not a deal. And this is essentially the framework that the Israelis have accepted over many months. And every time they've accepted it, Hamas or its sponsors have played some games, pulled back, changed the terms. They're not doing that at this point. In the first 42 days, if the Israelis can get back living hostages and not pay long-term costs, at least on the ground, with full withdrawals, it could be worthwhile as a benefit to at least try to resolve some of the psychological warfare that continues to go on that's inhibited their war campaign against Hamas. Get people back alive is a good thing. We should understand that we're going to learn that a lot of people are not alive in this process, and it's going to be even more painful if this unfolds. But once you get past that 42 days, thinking about all the terrorists you're releasing back into the wild, people who are real hardened core Palestinian terrorists who will return to the battlefield, and then actually ceding Gaza back to Hamas, I don't see how that's a sustainable reality for Israel long term. So we'll see how this plays out. But in the near term, if they can't get people back, the living hostages out, which clears a big hurdle in their campaign in Gaza, that would be a good thing.
So the Qataris, who have provided sanctuary for Hamas senior leadership and are, have been the broker here between the two sides, as you say, the more pressure being put on the Qataris. But then what do we expect the Qataris' position to be if there were a ceasefire and the hostage release? Then what happens and what is it that Israel and America should be prepared for?
I think that's a fundamental question here. Let's put aside the downsides of the deal, which I think are many. Let's say you actually played this out to the end of this deal. All the living hostages, all the dead hostages have been recovered. By the way, we should remind people there's 7 American citizens among them. I'm told 3 of whom are still alive and hopefully will come out in this first phase. But let's say you've gotten to this end point. You're going to have Hamas potentially retaking power, restoring its strength in Gaza. Unacceptable. You're still going to have a major non-NATO ally in Qatar sponsoring and harboring Hamas. Unacceptable. A NATO ally in Turkey, a recipient of U.S. foreign aid in Egypt or Lebanon coddling Hamas. Can't happen. We're going to have completely different policies towards these countries. Once the hostage extortion game has been alleviated from us, there should be no more illusion of this Qatari scam that we need Qatar as an interlocutor to a radical terrorist organization that butchers people the way Hamas does. That game has to be over.
Well, do you think something will actually be done before Trump is sworn in next Monday? Because he did remind everybody that they'd be wholly hell to pay if they were not returned.
Well, it doesn't appear under the framework that all hostages would be released. It's possible, if you read some of the details being leaked, that there's going to be 3 hostages released up front, which could happen before Inauguration Day. If those are the 3 living Americans, that would obviously be a pretty big symbolic victory for Trump and his threats and his demands. It's possible at least 2 of them would fall into the categories we've seen defined, which are these humanitarian categories. The third is an IDF soldier, young man, Edan Alexander, who was featured in the video a few weeks ago, propagandizing for Hamas, reading their script and calling out to President Trump. But if he could get Edan and the other 2 Americans in the package and get them out, he wouldn't get all the hostages out, but he'd get all the living Americans out.
Yesterday, Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing before Senate Armed Services, Mazie Hirono, who is, as you know, a dizzying intellect, pressed Pete Hegseth on these matters that have sent the D.C. press corps spinning Trump's interests in the Panama Canal and Greenland. It went like this.
Moving on. President-elect has attacked our allies in recent weeks, refusing to rule out using military force to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal, and threatening to make Canada the 51st state. Would you carry out an order from President Trump to seize Greenland, a territory of our NATO ally Denmark, by force, or would you comply with an order to take over the Panama Canal?
Senator, I will emphasize that President Trump received 77 million votes to be the lawful commander-in-chief of this country.
We're not talking about the election. My question is, would you use our military to take over Greenland or an ally of Denmark?
Senator, one of the things that President Trump is so good at is never strategically tipping his hand. And so I would never in this public forum give one way or another direct what orders the president would give me in any context.
Mazie Hirono, maybe she was a little under the weather or inebriated, not sure. She can't decide if Greenland is a territory of Denmark or just an ally of Denmark. But nonetheless, Rich, so in what order should Pete Hegseth dispatch special forces to take over Greenland, the Panama Canal, and then ultimately Canada?
Yeah, I'd be surprised how many members of Congress could find Greenland or the Panama Canal on a map without any identifying marks on the map, one of those blank ones. But apparently they're very, very, very concerned about these territories now actually coming under U.S. influence instead of moving towards Chinese CCP influence in the future. Anybody who believes that it's in our interest to allow China to take control of the Panama Canal needs their head examined. And people need to really do some research on what Greenland means strategically for the future if that falls into the orbit of China and Russia vis-a-vis the critical minerals in Greenland, and of course access through the Arctic and all the routes that possibly will be opened up in the future. So it's a ridiculous line of questioning, obviously, and I think Pete Hegseth did a very good job in not engaging in a hypothetical that was ludicrous.
By the way, everything old is new again. Ronald Reagan made American control of the Panama Canal an issue when he ran against Ford in '76, and then again Carter, in '80. I mean, it's just very interesting. This is not a new concern about sort of control of something that we built and paid for in our hemisphere for our purposes.
Right, and a problem we face because of Carter in many ways.
Yes. Rich Goldberg, former National Security Council official and U.S. Senate aide, currently senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Rich, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
At 7:37, we'll talk to our friend Steve Moore, economist Steve Moore, about incoming Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's 333 plan. 333 at 7:37.
Forget 999. But now let's head into the newsroom. Here's Mike Scott.
7:32, 5 degrees, skies are clear, sunrise over Chicago. Russia's military on Tuesday retaliated